confirm that the former Broward County Deputy Scott Peterson would not enter the building where a gunman was massacring school children in Parkland, Florida. Mark Furman weighs in on that, and I'll tell you who is really responsible for this travesty in tonight's Angle. Plus, Special Prosecutor Bob Mueller launches a new line of attack on President Trump as the outgoing FBI official who oversaw the Hillary email investigation begs to keep his pension. Also, Michelle Malkin, her take on parents in one school district fighting back against leftist indoctrination in the classroom. And Pat Caddell joins us with advice on the midterm elections that Republicans still want to take seriously. And first, walking out and walking away from the truth about the Parkland massacre, that's the focus of tonight's Angle. As we documented last night, the student walkout for gun control yesterday looked at times more like a political celebration than a somber protest, with left-wing politicians greeted like rock stars. Look at how the crowd gathered at the U.S. Capitol with their selfie sticks in hand, greeted Bernie Sanders as he made his way to the bullhorn. Oh my God, they were going nuts. It was pure partisan politics. It was scripted and screamed. And why am I saying that? Because
this is not simply about gun control anymore. Oh, here.
Just snap it in.
there you go. Okay.
Because this is, wait. Okay. Because this is not simply about gun control. This is about human life. This is about the children who have lost their lives to gun violence. So I ask our Republican lawmakers, is their right to have a gun more important than our right to live?
Not partisan at all. Look, that's a nice applause line, but of course, the wrath of the students is misdirected. The lines they're shouting, many used repeatedly over the years by anti-gun activists, conveniently do not address the real problem with that horrific tragedy at Stoneman Douglas High. The NRA is not responsible for allowing Nicholas Cruz to be armed and dangerous. Neither are Republican politicians, that young lady just called out, who support Second Amendment rights for law-abiding Americans. A new surveillance video just released by court order confirms what we already knew. Due to malfeasance, cowardice, or just pure poor judgment, the first officer on the scene, Broward Deputy Scott Peterson, did not enter Building 1200 where Cruz was carrying out his slaughter. He arrives on a golf cart, you see him there, with staff members while the massacre was underway. And the video shows Peterson with his gun drawn, but then he steps back and he remains outside. And he stood there as Nicholas Cruz's 6-minute spree of shooting continued. Well, in a statement, Peterson's lawyer claimed the deputy thought the shots were being fired outside. But these radio communications released last week demonstrate that he knew the shots were coming from inside Building 1200.
Shots fired. 1200 building. 26. So we also heard it over by inside the 1200 building. Do not approach the 12 or 1300 buildings. Stay at least 500 feet away at this point.
Wow. As we'll discuss in a moment, Peterson and none of the other 3 officers that were on the scene followed police protocol. Remember what Broward Sheriff Scott Israel, that number, said when he was pressed about Peterson's response?
I gave him a gun. I gave him a badge. I gave him the training. If he didn't have the heart to go in, that's not my responsibility.
No. So much for the buck stopping at the top. Now, Israel, I know it sounds tough here, but he comes off as a slimy self-promoter. And the stories over the years about how he's hired his friends and his family in key positions, reportedly many of them not qualified, after he was elected. And this is the same guy, by the way, Sheriff Israel, who thought it was appropriate to opine on a CNN town hall just a week after the shooting. They were supposed to be doing the investigation. He's on TV. And of course, when he was on TV, he did not even mention the failure of Scott Peterson on scene. Look, many of those advocating for gun control post-Parkland They want to look away from the errors committed by law enforcement, which were numerous and frankly obscene at both the federal and the state level. There's almost no discussion at yesterday's rallies mentioning the fact that Nicholas Cruz's dangerous and disturbing behavior was flagged repeatedly to authorities over a period of 2 years, starting in February of 2016. Now, just a few reminders, because we forget this stuff after just a month. On February 5th, 2016, Broward police is told by an anonymous caller that Nicholas Cruz had threatened to shoot up his school and posted a photo of himself with guns on Instagram. The info was provided to Deputy Scott Peterson. Then on September 28, 2016, an investigator for the Florida Department of Children and Families concludes after a visit that Cruz is stable despite finding fresh cuts on his arms, apparently self-inflicted. His mother, Linda Cruz, said he had recently spoken of buying weapons. Then, on September 24th, 2017, a YouTube user named Nicholas Cruz posts a comment stating he wants to become, quote, a professional school shooter. The FBI in Mississippi hears of this, but fails to make the connection to Florida. Then there was this. A few weeks after his mother died, on November 29, 2017, the Palm Beach County family that took Cruz in after his mother's death called the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office to report a fight between Cruz and their son.
He bought a gun about a week and a half ago, and he gets it today, so that we're saying that he's going there now. Because that's all he wants is his gun, and that's all he cares about is his gun. And he bought tons of, bullets and stuff, and I took it away from him. And I have a bunch of other little guns here. And BB guns, though. But he has a real gun that he's going to get now.
Then she mentioned specific threats he had made.
He put the gun in the head of his brother before, so it's not the first time. And he did that to his mom. His mom died November 3rd. So he's not... It's not the first time he put a gun on somebody's head.
It's unbelievable to hear this. And then there were two other calls, one to Broward the next day and one to the FBI on January 5th of this year, tagging Cruz again as a potential school shooter. Neither Broward nor the FBI followed up. So, while everybody's denouncing the NRA or trashing President Trump in the wake of the sickening school shooting, activists might think that although it's fun to get the coverage on the evening news or, be the subject of an exciting viral video for your speech in front of the Capitol, you're only hurting your own cause if you refuse to acknowledge, really focus on the fact that we actually didn't need new laws to stop Cruz. We needed to follow the proper policing on the state and federal levels. Because had that policy, those protocols actually been conducted, Cruz would have been prevented from carrying out the Parkland carnage. He probably wouldn't have been able to get a gun in the first place. Sheriff Scott Israel, after all of this, look, he should have packed his desk as soon as he learned of Deputy Peterson's failure on his watch. The shooter was not confronted in the building. Instead of passing the buck and grandstanding against the NRA, that's what a good sheriff would have done. And that's the angle. Joining us now for reaction is Jeff Bell, the president of the Broward County Sheriff's Deputies Association, as well as Mark Furman, who is a former LAPD detective and a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, it's good to see you. Mark, let's start with you. It was chilling to watch the surveillance video and also to listen both to the students' 911 calls and to the old 911 calls that Cruz himself made and that Cruz's caretaker at the time had made. Your reaction to the new developments?
Well, when I watch the video, Laura, the thing that really strikes me is watching Peterson look at the building, not look at the area outside of the building. He knew the shots were coming from the building. He stood there and he listened for 4 to 5 minutes as probably as many as 17, 18, 20 people were shot inside, and he did nothing. So I watch him in that video. I don't think he was mentally or physically prepared for the job. I don't think he probably ever was. He lost his nerve if he ever had any. He lost it, and there's really no excuse for it. except for, I think one thing is there was probably a lack of training and leadership on that sheriff's department, coming right down from Sheriff Israel right down to Scott Peterson.
Jeff, you have spoken about this before, the utter lack of time and focus on training for the exact type of situation that Mark was analyzing there. And an active shooter, it has to be muscle memory. You just know what to do, and you have to train for repeatedly and often to be able to respond in the right way. I mean, most people do. So what do you know about the training at Broward? We know what the manual says, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but what actually took place?
Well, Laura, I would think that in Broward County, I could sum this up as the best with the law enforcement community. We viewed this as the perfect storm coming. And unfortunately, 17 people lost their lives in Parkland that day for a series of events that we consider to be bad policy, the wrong priorities in training, the politicizing of our police forces down here, and the bad implementation of deals that we've made with the school board with the Promise program and civil citation. And what I mean by training, when I go back to that, is that our trainers do a wonderful job with the limited resources that they have with the Broward Sheriff's Office. But what we need to do is focus the resources that we have on better tactics and better training. For example, we spend in in-service training 8 hours, mandatory in-service training in de-escalation tactics, and then we spend another 8 hours in politeness and policing tactics to be nicer to people that we're arresting. But when it comes time to practicing on the gun range and practicing scenarios, we dedicate 4 hours of training on the gun range where we may squeeze off about 150 rounds, and then 2 hours of practice with simulation on that. The wrong emphasis is being put on politicizing the police department and not training properly for these scenarios. It is out of control, and we have to stop this.
Okay, the politeness training, I think maybe I need some politeness training here because I'm being tough on Scott Israel, but here's the Broward County Sheriff's Office training manual, okay? Here's one full screen. The first officer or 2 officers on scene will immediately go to confront the shooter. Military tactics work well in this situation. Also, another part of it, remember, every time you hear a gunshot in an active shooter incident, you have to believe that another victim is being killed. Mark, you know this well with all your experience in LAPD. Something isn't adding up here. We're getting reports, and we're still doing actual investigation on this. Reports from retired officers, Mark, who say that because of the way the patronage system that Scott Israel has an effect there, we got a lot of people in place with inadequate experience to do the jobs they're supposed to be doing. Inadequate experience, but they got a connection because a friend of a friend gave a donation to his campaign, and it doesn't look good. On the surface, it doesn't look good. Your reaction?
Well, this is the problem when you have a politicized law enforcement agency, when you have an elected official calling the shots that quite possibly is a competent police officer, or he could just be a civilian that becomes sheriff. But when you start using nepotism to fill your ranks, or favors, or paying somebody back for their contributions or their support during a campaign, it's the kiss of death. This is a leadership problem. And as far as what Jeff was saying about training, level one of those beautiful golf courses down in Florida and make a range for the officers, a countywide, a state range. This is where the rubber meets the road. And as far as suspects and being nice, when they say you're under arrest, it's up to the suspect to determine what happens after that. If they want to play hard, then you play harder. That class just lasted 30 seconds. It's over. You need to focus all your attention on the threat and the deadly threat, not only to the officer, but to civilians and citizens that are completely unknowing of the threat in front of them. Officers know it, and they should train for it, and they should train for specific incidents, just like Parkland.
Jeff, I have to ask you about these calls that a lot of people haven't really focused on, but that late November call to 911. We had Nicholas Cruz himself call, saying, I was kicked out of the house I'm staying in. I got into a fight with someone. I was punching a wall. And then the Ms. Deschamps, who actually had taken in Nicholas Cruz, whose son got into the fight with him. She says on that 911 call that we just played, He has held a gun to his brother's head before and to his dead mother's head who had just recently died. So this was nothing new for him to threaten someone by holding a gun to his head. At that point, and you both can address this, how does the police not act on that, knowing that she says he's going to get a gun at Dick's Sporting Goods, and she's basically said, I'm very worried about that. And then she doesn't decide to press charges afterward because she felt bad for him or whatever. But couldn't the police have acted right at that moment?
Well, Laura, down here in Broward County, with the law enforcement officers, all of that was removed out of our hands with the civil citation program and the promise program, whether it's on the school or out on the street. For these misdemeanor crimes, we don't have the ability to arrest these juveniles and bring them down to the juvenile hall under arrest charges on that.
He's 19 years old there.
Our hands are tied.
Not a juvenile,
Correct.
19
now
years
he's 19.
old.
Correct, he is 19 now, but we've created this sense of empowerment to allow Mr. Cruz and other people like this to get to this point where nothing has happened in their life, and now we've created this problem.
Right, I get that, but Mark, my point is, at that point, when his guardian essentially says he's pointing a gun at my son, and then his mother, and then his brother, and he's going to get a weapon, could the police at that point have done something, and should they have?
Yes, they could have, and it's a felony. It's assault with a deadly weapon.
It's not a misdemeanor.
Or it's brandishing a Well, it's not a misdemeanor. I mean, brandishing a firearm is a misdemeanor, but when you couple it with a threat, a visible or a verbal threat, then it's assault with a deadly weapon. You have a victim, it's an arrestable offense, and at the very least, you get the weapons out of the house, you arrest the juvenile, you get him into the system, you get him in front of a detective, a social worker, you get him into a juvenile hall, and if he's an adult, you get him into jail and have a detective talk to him. You do what you can, you get all the guns, everything that he has then, and you take it.
I mean, there's so many things that were red flags here, flares, fireworks. The fact that none of them added up to an intervention that stopped this is really stunning. And none of this was discussed at the rallies yesterday. It was all Donald Trump's bad and get the guns. I mean, that's all we were talking about. We weren't talking about any of this, and I know the other line is convenient. Great segment, guys. Thank you so much.
Laura,
and up next.
Could I add
go
something?
ahead. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just want to say, they're always looking for an excuse not to do something in certain instances. It's a female, it's a mental patient, it's a drug addict, it's a child. They're looking for a reason not to do something, because it's difficult, complicated, and time-consuming. And
they might get sued, right? Or they might get disciplined, or they might not get supported by the sheriff. That's another thing that they're worried about. Everyone's worried about getting sued and having their lives turned upside down. And so the police some of them are damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. It's a terrible situation. It was a great segment. And up next, we're going to tell you why the disgraced FBI official who oversaw the Hillary email investigation is tonight fighting to keep his job just days before his retirement. And later, Michelle Malkin joins us to discuss what may be the first wave of parents fighting back against leftist indoctrination in the classroom. Stay there. That FBI official Andrew McCabe asked DOJ officials today not to fire him before his retirement takes effect on Sunday. A pink slip could cost him his pension benefits. McCabe oversaw the FBI investigation into Hillary's email scandal, but the former deputy director announced his resignation in January to avoid a likely demotion. The FBI reportedly recommended firing McCabe after word leaked that the DOJ's Inspector General concluded that McCabe misled investigators. So let's discuss this and other developments with former FBI National Spokesperson John Iannarelli and Saul Weisenberg, who is Deputy Independent Counsel under Ken Starr. All right, Saul, let's start with you on this. So McCabe has all this junk in his past. His wife, getting the help from Hillary's friend and not revealing it, of course. And then, of course, everybody's concerned about the way he handled the email investigation. And now he's set to retire on Sunday. Is it a little late to be talking about firing him? I mean, if they were going to fire him, why wait until like Thursday or Friday right before he retires? That just seems bizarre to me.
It's bizarre, and it's a little unsettling, and even a lot of my friends who are in the Bureau and former Bureau are a little upset with the timing of it. To come in 2 or 3 days for the head of OPR within the Bureau to come in 2 or 3 days before his retirement and put A.G. Sessions in that situation is a little bit weird. And you know, Laura, I am no fan of how McCabe has handled these things. Keep in mind that the only way an FBI agent is going to really lose his pension is not through general misconduct. It is through basically not telling the truth, being dishonest. And that's what the supposed allegation is. And of course, we haven't seen the OIG report. We don't know for sure what it is, but there's just something a little bit troubling about the timing. And the person who heads up OPR within the FBI is not a very popular person.
Yeah, well, again,
right. A lot of her rulings have been overturned, up at the next level. In fact, the people that she's disciplined who then come back are known as boomerangs in the Bureau because a lot of her rulings are overturned.
Yeah, well, it is again established, is it not, John, that we had a situation where McCabe did not reveal the extent of the help his wife received from a very close friend of Hillary Clinton when Andrew McCabe was leading the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. Of course, Terry McAuliffe, a connected PAC, giving that several $100,000 to his wife's failed bid for the state legislature.
That's all true, and all due respect to Saul, I'm going to disagree, because the reality is if they did something after he retires, there's no repercussions. Your pension is not a guaranteed gift. When you're an FBI agent, it's about living up to the protocols and policies, honesty and integrity. Would you rather that he be allowed to retire even though something may have been done wrong and it was determined by OPR, yet he can benefit? Agents are held accountable for their behaviors, and I think this speaks to many things that happened when Mr. McCabe was working for Director Comey.
Sarah Huckabee today on The View said, look, this is for Jeff Sessions to decide, but it was at a briefing, but she reiterated that he was a bad actor in their view. And so she kind of gave the drive-by, but he's a bad actor, but this is up to Jeff Sessions. This is what that renowned legal scholar, Sunny Hostin, today said on The View. Let's watch.
We've seen this war on our intelligence community, this war on the FBI. I mean, this man is a career agent. I don't know what he did or did not do, but I am troubled with this constant attack on our intelligence community, because that is the stuff that dictators are made of.
This is stuff that dictators are made of, because the intelligence community never gets anything wrong, Saul. They never make a mistake and never get anything wrong. Okay, 9/11. Hello.
It's a ridiculous comment, but again, keep in mind, agents, supervisors, whoever they are within the Bureau, they only really lose their pension, which is probably the best pension in the whole U.S. government, for the dishonesty, that kind of dishonorable conduct. He would never lose his pension because he did, even if he really was a bad actor in the email investigation. So if we just don't know what's in the report, so if it's incredibly detailed and incredibly damning, and Sessions has a chance to look at it and make that decision in 2 or 3 days, that's one thing. But that's a very big deal to come in and present this to the Attorney General with only 2 or 3 days for him to look at it. And again, I think of this particular person, the head of OPR. She didn't do the investigation. She just took the OIG's report. And so I'm troubled by the timing of it. That's just the way it is. But
Sessions may have gotten a sneak preview, right, John, of what's in that IG report. I mean, he already knows basically what's in it. And so if it comes out, it's really bad on McCabe, then he sits on, woo, I have a pension, great. That also looks odd.
It does. And Saul's right. The reality is in the FBI, there's many things that can be forgiven yet punished, but lack of candor, not telling the truth, is unforgivable. Agents and support employees will be terminated for that type of thing to happen, and there are no exceptions. I think this is a good message when there has been leadership problems at times in the FBI, that no one can escape their responsibilities to their job.
Yeah, and if investigations look like they're at their very core politicized, talk about undermining the confidence of the FBI and the intel community. It's supposed to be calling balls and strikes without concern for politics, and that was my concern from the beginning. Yeah, really quick.
Look, just don't forget that if he really misled a federal investigation, there's a potential for a criminal referral there. So,
right, yeah, and then still getting the pension.
It's not like there won't be any. It's not like there won't be any more options.
Yeah, we got you. All right, guys, fantastic segment. And I have a question. Have you guys had enough of teachers filling your kids' heads with leftist propaganda? What parents are doing to fight back at one school district. Michelle Malkin reacts next. A school district near Milwaukee, it's called Oconomowoc, has instructed teachers to no longer hold discussions on social privilege unless they're related to a specific course or unless there's sufficient context. That's after parents strongly objected to an exercise on white privilege in which students were invited to fill out a privilege aptitude test. Is this the start of backlash against some type of leftist indoctrination in schools? Well, let's ask Conservative Review senior editor Michelle Malkin and Jason Nichols. He's a professor of African American Studies at the University of Maryland. It's great to have you both on, Professor.
Thank you.
I was kind of checking out the white privilege aptitude test, and I think I'll go through it for you, just for our viewers to understand what's going on. Okay, so here's some of the questions, or some of the statements. You have to check what applies to you. When I go to the store, people believe that I am trustworthy and I will not steal something. People in the store do not follow me around. Next one. As a boy, I can play with dolls, or as a girl, I can play with trucks without anyone questioning my choice. Next one. I will not be teased because of my last name. Next one. When I am taught about American history or about contributions made, I am sure that I will see and hear stories about people who look like me. And finally, I'm encouraged to excel in every subject in school. What are they getting at in this?
I think they're getting at certain people's experiences and trying to get people to recognize that not everyone has the same experience. And, you know, that's what I think unites us is we have to understand our differences, that some people have certain advantages and others don't. And, you know, I know for me, for example, I know we're talking about white privilege, but I have to recognize that I'm a privileged person in a lot of respects. I'm cisgender, I'm straight, I'm male. So I have certain advantages that other people don't have.
And for people who don't know what cisgendered is, explain that. I actually do know, but explain that.
So that means that my sex also matches my gender.
Okay. Okay, a lot of people don't know what that is. That's kind of a fairly new terminology. But
right.
So see what I see, and Michelle, you can chime in on this. When I hear privilege, like I grew up very working class, and there were kids in my town that were very privileged. Now, we weren't hungry. We didn't go on vacation or anything, but we weren't hungry. But there were other people who were more privileged. And I lived in a town that was pretty much, white bread town. But I don't like white privilege, black privilege. I don't know. To me, it's the color designation that I don't think is always that accurate.
Well, I think that a lot of this social justice radicalism is not about instructing children in any kind of core academic field. And that's what the parents who objected were getting at, because this has nothing to do with the mission of public education. This is about brainwashing generations of children into the very kind of racial and ethnic and gender divisiveness and, yes, discrimination that so many of these left-wing activists purport to be against. The kind of blanket stereotypes and the grievance mongering that manifests itself in so-called privilege aptitude tests like this. Laura, it's a predetermined outcome. You are not allowed to challenge the premise that simply because of the color of your skin, you automatically have certain privileges. And that's what these parents rose up against when this happened 2 months ago on Martin Luther King Day. Nobody asked for their consent or any kind of parental permission to indoctrinate these children. And if you look at the actual academic test scores in the Oconomowoc school district, they're barely 50% in proficiency in math and English, and that's what they should be concentrating on.
Professor, here's a little soundbite from a BuzzFeed video about what white privilege is. Let's watch.
Some people are born into families where they have to walk miles just to get water. All I have to do is turn on a faucet. That's privilege.
Okay, now you have to admit that's just ridiculous. I mean, that's now privilege. I mean, maybe in other countries you have to walk miles to get. But it just seems like we're reaching to find the privilege. I just turn on a faucet, so I'm privileged. So pretty much everybody in our studio, all the crew, we're all privileged, I guess.
Yeah, Laura,
people of all different
I don't
colors
think that was definitely. I don't think that was specifically referring to white
It is funny
privilege.
though.
I think that was referring to American privileges that we have. That the fact that we are able to turn on faucets, unless you live in Flint, Michigan, you can turn on a faucet and get a drink of water and assume that it's going to be healthy.
But to Michelle's point, that aren't we worried at some point that this focus is what indeed is dividing us as Americans? I feel like you and I could sit down, we could agree on so much stuff, like politics, schmolitics, but we could agree on so much about kids and good manners and all the things that we love about people and relationships. But then we go like, well, you have white privilege. I'm like, what? I worked my tail off my whole life. My mom was a waitress till she was 74 years old. I don't really want to hear about white privilege because my mom had crippled hands. She couldn't even hold things when she was 75 because she had worked her tail off her whole life. So that was privilege.
I think that people misunderstand what white privilege is actually referring to. It doesn't negate hard work. It doesn't actually try to refer to guilt. And the other thing that I would refer to or try to respond to Ms. Malkin's comment, and that is that, this is meant to make good citizens, make us understand one another and understand our experiences.
I'm all about that.
As far as excuse me, hold on. As far as I was, your mother's hard work. So let's take a quick metaphor here. If we're both running a race, and I'm running a steeplechase, and you're running, a straight path, it doesn't mean that you're not faster than me. It doesn't mean that you didn't train harder than I did. It just means that you have a clear path, and I have certain obstacles that you don't have.
We all have obstacles.
Absolutely.
All of us have obstacles.
Not all of our obstacles are the same.
No, they're not. That's what makes us different, and I think that's what makes us interesting and unique. And that's all of our experiences different. Michelle. Yeah.
And if I may, the whole point of the social justice brainwashing is that it dehumanizes individual experience. What drives this ideology and why it's so toxic and why so many parents are rising up against it is because it saps the individualism out of every person's story. And the professor says that, oh, well, we just misunderstand it. Oh, I understand it very clearly because it's right here in the privilege test where it says being white lets you fill in the blank, allow students to provide their opinions of the things that occur because of white privilege. Every American story in this country is different, and to keep people relegated into those boxes is exactly what Martin Luther King fought against. Either you believe that we should judge people by the content of their character rather than the color of the skin, or you blame them for every last thing because of what their skin cells look like.
All right, Jason.
All right. So, it's interesting that she pulled out one of the two Martin Luther King quotes that she's probably familiar with. I think if you look at that privilege test, it's talking about some of the issues that people face.
Hey, you just invoked your privilege right there, as if I haven't, memorized by heart the letter from the Birmingham jail.
Okay, I'd love to hear it.
Check your privilege, man.
Go ahead. I'd love to hear the first 3 lines of the letter from the Birmingham jail. Let's hear it.
It's late at night, and I don't want any quizzes here. Okay, let me I'm not saying I brought it.
She brought it up, but she memorized
it. I think a good point. I think a good way to end this is there is so much as human beings that bring us together.
Absolutely.
And I'm worried that by bifurcating, whether it's of gender or that we put people in boxes. And I think we want to treat people, you're a human being, you had struggles, I had struggles. We can get past all that stuff and we can connect on a human level. I don't think necessarily saying white privilege, black understanding, and Latino culture, we all have different experiences. And sometimes they're blended, sometimes they're wild or they're conventional. But I don't think just denoting skin color is the right way to go here, because I think we're much more complicated than the color of our skin. That's my view.
That's very true, but I think we have to also recognize. I think it's important for me to recognize the things that you face as a woman. I think that I have to recognize that so that I can help you to fight against it.
All right, we're all going to go out for drinks after this. All right, great to see you both. A Democratic pollster coming out believes Republicans can sweep the midterm elections if they run on some key issues. Pat Caddell up next. After that conservative Democrat Connor Lamb narrowly won Tuesday's special election in Pennsylvania for a House seat, a Democratic pollster has some advice for Republicans. Pat Goodell says Republicans can win the November midterm elections if they run on some key issues. So what are they? Let's ask the man himself. Joining us now from South Carolina, Pat Goodell. All right, Pat, great to see you. So what are the key things that Republicans need to run on?
Well, let me start by saying what I actually said in the interview. They have to nationalize the election. The election right now is being nationalized. It's being nationalized on one basis. Is there anything you don't like about Donald Trump, therefore you should vote against him? It is the problem for incumbent presidents. And particularly when you have the Democratic base revved up. The problem Republicans had, as they had in Allegheny County and other places, is in traditionally Republican suburbs. They cannot afford to get the shellacking in suburbs like they did in Allegheny County, which went 7 points for Romney, 4.5 or so for Trump, and went like 16, 17 points.
But what are the issues they need to focus on, Pat? What are some,
well, the first thing,
the key issues?
Let me kick off first. The reason that we have right now the Democrats everywhere else, the progressive Democrats, many of them already taking a stand for impeachment. I don't think the country is interested in, and particularly Republicans. You've got to reignite Republicans with their beliefs. And that is one. Do you want to weaponize the Constitution for the basis of removing anybody you disagree with politically? We saw in Wisconsin how the reaction to that helped Scott Walker win his recall election by a bigger margin than anyone predicted. Immigration. That is an issue that I looked at the Connor Lamb stuff. He was very wishy-washy. The Democrats have a serious problem now on immigration. Now they have turned down the DACA deal and basically, despite public opinion, are willing to they just will not end chain migration, and they will have nothing to do with ending the lottery. And we know, and the consequences of those are very serious. Yet the Democrats, in short, there's a Republican case to be made here. And if I were, as a Democrat, would be very worried, which is the argument that you put the interest of illegal aliens and immigrants in this country ahead of the rights of citizens. That was never really developed. I believe that could have caused Lamb problems, just as I believe on impeachment he could have had problems. You've got the drain the swamp. These are all issues that Trump triumphed. The problem is the Republican Party has no strategies. It has a bunch of consultants. Wow. Look, they spent $10 million in consultants to run terrible ads and lose.
Yeah, well, you got to have great dynamic candidates, and you have to be unafraid to make the case for American renewal and American greatness. Got to be bold and unafraid. And let's face it, we don't have the greatest candidates.
And they are. And
I can tell you that.
Republican leadership.
Pat, we'll have you back. We'll have you on radio tomorrow for sure. Okay. And we'll be right back. Special edition of our new. After that conservative Democrat Connor Lamb narrowly won Tuesday's special election in Pennsylvania for a House seat, a Democratic pollster has some advice for Republicans. Pat Goodell says Republicans can win the November midterm elections if they run on some key issues. So what are they? Let's ask the man himself. Joining us now from South Carolina, Pat Goodell. All right, Pat, great to see you. So what are the key things that Republicans need to run on?
Well, let me start by saying what I actually said in the interview. They have to nationalize the election. The election right now is being nationalized. It's being nationalized on one basis. Is there anything you don't like about Donald Trump, therefore you should vote against him? It is the problem for incumbent presidents. And particularly when you have the Democratic base revved up. The problem Republicans had, as they had in Allegheny County and other places, is in traditionally Republican suburbs. They cannot afford to get the shellacking in suburbs like they did in Allegheny County, which went 7 points for Romney, 4.5 or so for Trump, and went like 16, 17 points.
But what are the issues they need to focus on, Pat? What are some,
well, the first thing,
the key issues?
Let me kick off first. The reason that we have right now the Democrats everywhere else, the progressive Democrats, many of them already taking a stand for impeachment. I don't think the country is interested in, and particularly Republicans. You've got to reignite Republicans with their beliefs. And that is one. Do you want to weaponize the Constitution for the basis of removing anybody you disagree with politically? We saw in Wisconsin how the reaction to that helped Scott Walker win his recall election by a bigger margin than anyone predicted. Immigration. That is an issue that I looked at the Connor Lamb stuff. He was very wishy-washy. The Democrats have a serious problem now on immigration. Now they have turned down the DACA deal and basically, despite public opinion, are willing to not, they just will not end chain migration, and they will have nothing to do with ending the lottery. And we know, and the consequences of those are very serious. Yet the Democrats, in short, there's a Republican case to be made here. And if I were, as a Democrat, would be very worried, which is the argument that you put the interest of illegal aliens and immigrants in this country ahead of the rights of citizens. That was never really developed. I believe that could have caused Lamb problems. Just as I believe on impeachment, he could have had problems. You've got the drain the swamp. These are all issues that Trump triumphed. The problem is the Republican Party has no strategies. It has a bunch of consultants. Look, they spent $10 million on consultants to run terrible ads and lose.
Yeah, well, you got to have great
simple.
dynamic candidates, and you have to be unafraid to make the case for American renewal and American greatness. Got to be bold and unafraid. And let's face it, we don't have the greatest candidates.
And
they are.
And
I can tell you that.
Republican leadership.
Pat, we'll have you back. We'll have you on radio tomorrow for sure.
Okay.
And we'll be right back. Special edition of our new